This is Harvey Sollberger speaking, and I'm going to be speaking with my mother, Margaret Sollberger, about her youth and growing up in Elgin, Iowa. It's November 8th, 1998, and we're sitting here in our dining room in San Diego, California. Mom, you were born on November 27th, 1911. East of Elgin. Can you tell us about your parents and how they got to Elgin? I remember you told me the story of your father who arrived at Ellis Island on his 20th birthday, which I think was March 22nd, 1892, right? He was born in 1872.
Yeah.
So that would have been the first.
His 20th birthday.
That would have been the first member of our family coming to this country, and we can pinpoint it to the exact day, March 22nd, 1892. But you were born almost 20 years later, in 1911.
Yeah.
So can you tell something about your dad and what he was doing in Elgin and the things that he did before you were born?
He worked for other people.
And his name was Fritz or Frederick Dennler, right?
Friedrich, yeah.
Friedrich Dennler.
Dennler.
Okay, sorry to interrupt you. Yeah, he worked for other people.
Well, he usually got jobs from early March through the summer till the corn was out of the fields.
Till the harvest, I suppose.
The harvest.
He'd work and they'd harvest, yeah.
And that would usually be, back then it was all done by hand, it'd usually be late November or somewhere around that. And then different times he'd take off and go to Switzerland, say from maybe early December or mid-December until 1st of March. Then he'd come back again because he would have a job lined up for the summer to work on a farm.
How many trips do you think he made back and forth to Switzerland? Or can you estimate or guess?
I think I used to know it, but I just couldn't tell you exactly.
But he made several trips?
Yeah, he made several trips.
And that was in a day when it took a long time. You had to take the train all the way to the East Coast and then take a boat?
I think sometime he was just on the ocean 3 weeks.
Yeah,
And well, he'd go back to visit his family, you know.
Well, when he came, he had two brothers who had already come to the Elgin area, right?
Oh, yeah.
Can you
Jake
tell?
Dennler and Gottlieb Dennler.
Jake and Gottlieb Dennler. I've seen their tombstones in the cemetery.
Oh, yeah.
Where your dad and mother are buried.
Yeah.
And when did they come to Elgin? They came earlier, right? Or can you tell us something about Jake and Gottlieb? They were older brothers of your dad.
Jake Dennler was the oldest of the family. But I can't tell you what year or anything. I think even his own kids didn't know, because one time I was going to write some of these things down and they didn't know anything. Gottlieb Dennler came here at the age of 14. A Millenthaler that was formerly from Bleienbach had come over here, and I don't know how long he was here, maybe 2-3 years or something. Then he wanted to go back, and he go back to Switzerland. And then Gottlieb came back over with him.
And when he was 14?
Yeah, he was 14.
Well, I think you could figure out when that was, because I think the tombstone in the cemetery has his birth date. I think sometime in the 1860s, maybe, just a little bit before your dad.
He was over here.
So he came at the age of 14 to, and he was like a hired man or something, I suppose, or he was working for.
It was some Millenthaler that was actually over here that was a Bleibacher.
Yeah.
and he brought him over here.
Were the Dennlers?
He had gone out to visit, and then he, and I suppose they had a big family there, and they were glad to get rid of one.
Yeah, well, was your family, the Dennlers, were they from Blayenbach in Switzerland? I see, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
And
Efusamis, they always called him.
what did they call him?
Efusami.
Uh-huh.
His name was Samuel Dennler, the father.
Yeah, oh, the father of your
My
dad.
Mm-hmm.
And of Jacob and Gottlieb.
They always, seems like years ago, they all had nicknames.
Nicknames,
Efusami, they'd say, and that would be, you know,
that was, that's how they knew him, but his real name was Samuel, but he had that.
Samuel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And why do you think that the three brothers left Blayenbach? I mean, to go so far and travel so far.
Well, some Millenthaler from here, but he had been in this country or came before, and they were related to the Millenthalers, I think, that had that funeral home there for years. And he went back to visit him somehow. I don't know. Gottlieb came over at the age of 14.
Was he the first, and then his brother?
He would have been, no, let's see.
Or was Jake Dennler the first?
Maybe Jake, I think maybe was over here before.
Yeah. So it's like one Blayenbacher, maybe Mühletaler, moved to Elgin, and then he went back and he said, why don't you come and,
Gottlieb back with him.
Yeah, well, it may be too that it was just hard to earn a living in Switzerland. There were
they had
limited land and
they
large
had
families.
12 kids there,
12 kids, yeah.
But then
you mean those three brothers were among 12?
Yeah.
I see.
There was 2 or 3 that died as smaller kids, you know. So that back then they didn't have any doctors, or if they did have them, they couldn't afford to get them, I guess, to take care of the children. And they had like scarlet fever and all kinds of different things back then.
Yeah.
And no help from doctors.
Yeah.
That's why so many of them lost several children.
Yeah. So your dad came to Elgin direct in 1892, direct from landing in New York, and came there.
Well, he always said the day he landed in New York, he was 20 years old. And he told that over and over, everybody ever talked to.
Yeah. And what was Elgin like? I guess it was a Swiss community. There were already quite a few Swiss people there at that time.
Of course, I wasn't.
Well,
I wasn't living, but it was just a small town, and I suppose gradually it got a little bigger and a little bigger. But it was just mostly Swiss that started it, I guess, or settled there.
Well, there were Norwegians too, weren't there? I mean,
there are Norwegians. Yeah.
The story I heard from you once was that there were Norwegians on one side of the Turkey River and Swiss on the other, and they pretty much kept to themselves at first.
That's true. That's what that down by where my folks lived there, in the Grandma Sloop in one house and my folks in the other, below the cemetery there.
Yeah.
And they said...
That's south of the cemetery toward Route 56.
Yeah. They said down at the river, see, the river wasn't very far from the cemetery there. You just
that's where the cemetery we're talking about is the Apostolic Cemetery east of Elgin. Yeah. So the river was close by. Yeah.
That they fixed something down there so the people could go back and forth, kind of a hanging bridge.
Oh, like a rope bridge or a suspension,
Then they could go back and forth. That was not Adolf, but what was his name? Well, Baumgartner was their name. That lived right below Grandma Sloop's place down there. But I don't know, that was just things I heard, but
So do you think that rope bridge, that was then the two communities began to
that's when they,
get to know each other?
yeah.
Hmm. But I guess the Swiss were all speaking Schweizerdeutsch, right?
Oh, yeah.
Was anybody speaking English then? Or did they just speak their Schweizerdeutsch among themselves?
I wasn't living then, but naturally among the Swiss, they just spoke Swiss, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But,
and the Norwegians, I suppose,
and
at
they
first spoke their language.
Yeah.
And yet, when you were growing up, some of your closest friends were the Hansen family,
Yeah.
and who were Norwegians. So,
Tom Hansen, Martin Hansen's.
so by that time, the
Christmas.
Swiss and the Norwegians were sort of neighbors, or
Well,
could be neighbors anyway.
they finally, you know, they kind of, at one time, I guess, they kind of were more grouped together, but gradually maybe somebody sold out and maybe a Norwegian bought the place or something. But it was, I don't know, there were quite a few Swiss families, so I don't remember.
Yeah, what are the names of some of the Swiss families that you can remember? There were Dennlers and
Yeah, there were
Mühletahlers, and what are some of the other family names?
Let's see, Baumgartners. There were 2 or 3 different families of Baumgartners. There was Hofer, like Ben Hofer,
Mm-hmm.
and let's see, what a lady.
Biedekofer? Was that a...
No, this is a lady that was living close to Ben Hofer's there. I forgot the last name now, but I remember it. They all said her husband died kind of young, but I knew her at one time when I'd see her, but not that I had read any. But their name was something different. It was a Swiss name too, but I don't remember what it was. I think she remarried and then married a Frederick.
Well, that's another Swiss name,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah, there was Metzgers.
Metzgers, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then there was Biedekofers, that was Walter Biedekofer's folks, and those Metzgers, they lived kind of on a little side road near the school where I went. And then there was Gottfried Fredericks there, and Adolf Baumgartners, and Albert Biedekofers, Rob Lehmans, and Schmitz, and some more, 2, 3 more families of Biedekofers, and Emil Moore, that's a Swiss, he came from Switzerland. And there was Emil Frieden. He was a brother to Levi Frieden, evidently.
How many of these families came from Bleinbach? Did several of them, or were they from different parts of German-speaking Switzerland?
A lot of them came from other parts that I wouldn't know.
Yeah.
Friedrich. My dad, there was John Frederick, and then Fred Frederick. And once when my dad was going back, the Fredericks called him when they heard, I guess, that he was going to go back. So they wanted him to come down. And this was Fred Frederick, and he was in bed, my dad used to say, and he had TB. But he wanted my dad to go and see his brothers. And, well, he went to see them.
Yeah.
But he said when he got there was 2 or 3 of them were sick in bed too. They had tuberculosis in the family.
Must have run in the family, yeah.
And the one that died in, there, that's what he was in bed with.
Fred,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Was that in Bleinbach? I see.
No, they're not from Bleinbach. It's, well, I don't remember the name. It wasn't really far from Herzogenbuchsee up in some place there, but I couldn't tell.
One of those little towns.
Where,
in the
where they originally were from.
Emmental.
My dad did go to stop and tell him, that his brother wanted him to come and see him. And
so sometimes one family member, one person going back and forth would carry news of the family to other relatives.
Yeah. Well, I guess it was a big family. It was, and a lot of boys and girls in that family, the way my dad used to say. Well, back then they always had about 10, 12 kids, seems like. Sometimes even more.
Yeah, well, that was a good way to get help on the farm, I suppose.
Yeah, I suppose.
You did some work on the farm, didn't you? You had jobs and chores when you were growing up. Didn't you tell me about you had to herd the cows?
Yeah, take them out on the road, let them out on the road, because some years you didn't have as much rain as you should have, and the pasture would be so short they just couldn't, chew any grass off, I guess. And so we, like spring after school was out or something, I'd take them out, let them out. They'd be waiting, to go out and open the gate, and they'd go out. And I'd go with them up. Well, they just keep eating grass. I didn't have.
Were they eating grass along the side of the road?
Yeah, along the side of the road, yeah.
And
that was up, we always went up like towards where Al Dennler's live, up that road, and then over, and then out towards 56.
That's the road that runs south and finally hits 56. Yeah, so your dad went back and forth several times. I remember seeing a picture of him that was taken at a 4th of July celebration. It's in one of the family albums. There were like 50 or 75 people posed for a group portrait, and you see his face, this young man sort of in the back of the crowd, but recognizable. And that must have been shortly after he came, probably sometime in the 1890s.
I suppose back in there. Yeah, there was one picture there that we had where they were thrashing, and he was on there too. That was, he worked in Elgin there. Some of those were not Swiss so much, they were German people.
How did the Swiss and the Germans get along? Did they could talk the same language, aside from English? But
well, yeah, of course the Germans, they don't speak Bandage like we do.
Right.
They speak German then. Then the Swiss speak Swiss to each other, but they speak German if they would go to Germany.
Yeah, so they could switch back and forth. Yeah. And well, your dad got married. Your dad and mom got married in 1910, right? I mean, a year before you were born.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering. He was at that time almost 40 years old.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering why he hadn't gotten married before. Was it hard to find a wife around Elgin, or was he just?
He didn't only live around Elgin. He was out in Rock Valley. He worked. I couldn't tell you. It was 2-3 years or what.
Oh, so 1 year he might be in one place with one farmer, and then he might go somewhere else and work. And was he saving money to buy land then, or was he just pretty much living from year to year?
I'm sure he was saving all he could, because if he didn't, he couldn't have made those trips back and forth like he did. But back then, I think he used to say the trip cost him $50.
Yeah.
And then he'd work through the summer until the corn was out, because then they had to do it all by hand, and have the wagon and team out there and throw the corn over in the wagon, the ears, and keep it going.
Yeah.
And then, I don't know, it was, then you had your grain too, you had oats and some wheat, and you had to make hay, and so you had something for the cows and the horses.
Yeah.
But I don't.
But tell me, how did your dad and mom meet? Was she from Bleienbach too?
Well,
her family was the Viechter family.
No, she was from. She always called it the Stammbach or something, where she actually grew up. What was it?
Was that a town or
Oh, it's a village.
a village?
And then she'd have to go from there to Herzegovina to Under, what do you call it, Onderwijzig. You know, like, that's, you know, where you went with to study the Bible, you know.
Oh, it's like some sort of Bible study or catechism. So she was getting ready to be confirmed probably in the Lutheran church. Yeah.
And she always said, she told them many times, and of course they had such a big family that they probably didn't have clothes, you know, like they should either, but she'd have to go down through that, but I don't know what the name of it was, to go to Herzegovina. And she said that used to be so cold through there, that wind, that cold north wind would just whip through there, but I don't know much more about that anymore either. But
so, well, before she got married, because she was just 3 years younger than your dad, right? She was born in 1875.
yeah,
She, as a young woman, had worked as a, what sort of work did she do? She worked for a wealthy French family. What we would call an au pair girl or governess.
She did that, Well, she first.
What was her sister worked also for
Betty.
Yeah, this was the Japy family in Beaucourt, France.
And they were millionaire people too, you know.
Yeah, this was a wealthy French industrial family based in Paris, but their summer or country home was in eastern France.
Factory. They made kettles that you cook in, and they also made dishes. Had two different factories. One was near there where my mother stayed. And of course, she was hired there to be a nurse for the little ones that were born. She stayed there, I think, 15 or 16 years.
Yeah, so she almost was like a member of the family then.
Yeah.
And her sister was working there.
Betty was...
Bertie, Tante Bertie, and she married a Frenchman, Monsieur Lemaire.
Lemaire.
And stayed in France.
Worked there, but she did, well, the rich lady had a lot of clothes. And you know, years ago, how that clothes was, buttons sometimes, from here to who knows where.
Brocades and all kinds of fabrics, I suppose.
And I don't know. She just was the seamstress.
She was
always take care of that and see that it's, when she wanted to wear it, that it was okay. And they used to have those hook and snap things, you know, down the back or the front by the time you close that all and open it.
Took all day to get dressed or undressed. So your mom was there for close to 15 years, taking care of the children. She must have spoken French very well during that time.
She had to, otherwise she couldn't have been there.
Yeah. So how did she and your dad meet then? Get to know each other and get married?
My mother there were 6 sisters and 3 brothers in the family. And Tante Lottie was a sister, you know, that lives there in Bleinbach. And Tante Lottie married Ernst Dennler, that was a brother to my dad.
Okay, so one of her sisters married one of your dad's brothers, so it was almost through the family that they got acquainted.
Yeah, that's how that started out, I guess.
So they got married in 1910, and then your mom came back to Elgin with your father, and that was her first trip.
He brought her back here then,
And did they ever go? Well, of course they went back in the 1920s, I guess, when you were a young woman. But by the time he brought her back, then he had his own farm, didn't he? Or can you tell us something about the place you were born?
He was staying mostly at Jake Dennler's place. That was his his brother.
And that was down in the valley there, south of the Apostolic Cemetery.
No, Jake Dennler's, that was more back where my folks lived. It was kind of, well, it was kind of a valley there too, but...
Yeah, well, your folks were up on higher ground, but it's that road that runs from the Apostolic Cemetery down toward Route 56.
That same road,
Yeah, and I remember last summer we went looking for your old house. I mean, there's no farm or dwelling there now where you were born, because you were born right there on the farm. But I'll bet if we looked a little more closely, we might still find something, some foundation stones or something.
Foundation might be there, you know, and again, maybe it isn't.
But this is, what did they call that? Was that Cherry Valley or...
they called that section through there Tom Hansen's, Kristen's, Martin Hansen's, and the Dennlers. That was still, I don't know who ever gave it that name or why. I never really inquired, but they just for the news in the paper they called that Cherry Valley News, and that went on for years and years. But who really gave it?
Well, your dad bought his land, wasn't it, from an older Norwegian couple?
Yeah, it was Ericsson. And see, when he was over there and got married, then he brought my mother back over here. And so they lived with Jake Dennler then there.
This was around 1910.
And then I think about, well, that Ericsson, let's see, he had, my dad used to say, I believe he had 3 sons. And his wife died. They were an old couple, I guess. And the sons came to get him. They didn't want him to live there alone.
His wife died, so he was there alone.
Evidently, shortly before my dad bought it then, and then it was for sale. And he used to say how much he had to pay for it, but it wasn't very much.
What do you think, a few $100 maybe? Or?
Maybe.
Yeah.
Few hundred, but not anywhere near 1,000 or anything like
well,
that.
you know the exact spot where the house was, and right now there's no house there, no one's living there, but there's a little road, a little pathway going in, almost like a little
there
passage.
was a road going down for years, you know.
Yeah, because this is the road that runs south to Route 56.
That grew up into weeds and trees. Now you couldn't go down that road anymore.
But anyway, you know the spot, and there was a house there. In other words,
there was a log cabin.
A log cabin.
And that was Ericsson's lived in that. They were an old couple, and they said his wife died, and I think they had 3 sons. That's what they used to say. And then those boys didn't want him to live there alone.
Sounds like a fairy tale. 3 sons, 3 is an important number. So anyway, he sold to your folks.
And so then that was just the time that my dad brought my mother to this country. And they were living at Jake Dennler's then, and I guess kind of looking for something.
Yeah.
And happened that woman died, and the boys, they were an old couple, and the boys didn't want him to be there alone. So they were glad that somebody came and bought it.
Yeah. Well, so your family, your dad and mom got the log cabin. Did they build a house too, or were you born in the log cabin?
I was born in the log cabin.
Well, I'm impressed. So my mother was born in a log cabin. That's real pioneer stuff.
Well, it was a 1-room log cabin. She used to talk about it. I don't think she really liked it.
You got to remember, she was living in France for 15 years in this elegant mansion, and I saw that mansion in Beaucourt when we visited there in 1958. So she really knew something about elegant living, and in a short time she was
come out and live
transferred to Frontier, Iowa, living in a one-room log cabin. So that must have been a real change for her.
Yeah, they took, the old lady died, and the boys didn't want him to be alone. Then they came and got him, and so they saw him. I can't remember. It wasn't very much. If it was $200 or $300, I don't know, but it wasn't. But
how much land came with the? You remember how many acres?
40 acres.
40 acres and a log cabin. Okay.
Yeah.
But then your dad built a house, didn't he? Or he hired the Hansons, I think, to build a house.
Fred Hanson, yeah.
Because you said at one point the Hansons were very good at carpentry.
Yeah, they were.
Building.
They, while they were living in the log cabin, they built the house right north of it there.
Was it attached to the cabin, or was it separate?
No,
it was separate.
It was separate.
And then what happened to the cabin when the house was finished? I suppose they moved into the house, and did they tear the cabin down or use it for storage?
Because I never saw it.
I see. You don't remember it?
No, I don't remember.
You only know it by being told about it.
They cleaned up. I suppose there was no, the old folks couldn't do. Maybe some, but they cleaned that up and put a fence up, made a garden, and everything. So that got burned up, I guess. I don't know. Unless Fred Hanson took some lumber from it, I don't think that they did. I don't know. I imagine they just burned it up through.
Yeah.
Or hauled it away someplace. I don't know what they did with it, but it was not there. I never saw it.
Yeah. So what are some of your first memories of? You were born in November 1911. Do you have any memories of when you were a little girl living there, or I can remember a story you told me about your dad killing a rattlesnake.
Telling what?
You told me about your dad killing a rattlesnake.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah.
I guess there were rattlesnakes up there in those
there were
limestone hills.
Great big bull snakes and rattlesnakes around that part of the country.
But then,
once my dad killed a rattlesnake, and that was, you could cut the rattlers off and take them to Elgin, to the courthouse, and they give you 75 cents. I think it had 11, either 10 or 11 rattlers, and then a button yet, that little button. After that got big enough, then another one would sprout there, I guess.
Well, who knows? Maybe that's up in some musty room in the attic of the Elgin courthouse still.
Yeah.
That 11-chambered rattle. No, probably not.
Dumped it out in the river.
Yeah, but you started going to school even before you went to school. You told me once that you were very sick when you were little, and they thought maybe you wouldn't even live. When you were a year or two old, did you have some serious illness?
I don't know if I was sick much I probably got a cold like other people do too, but I don't know that I was. I guess my mother had to get something at the drugstore to kind of, I don't know, tune me up or something. I don't know what they called it. Some kind of like a tonic or something, maybe.
Was that something a doctor prescribed, or was that just something that people did more or less on their own?
I think it was more or less. See, my mother, she went to school to take care of mothers and babies.
Well, yeah, she was experienced with small children,
And I remember sometimes she brought up, they bought this or that at the drugstore for me. And I suppose, I don't know, I don't remember that they ever said how much I weighed when they maybe didn't even have a scale.
You were born right there in the log cabin.
In that log cabin. We talked about that. Alice stopped in not too long ago, and something we brought up about it, And then that clock, that old clock that we had there, that high one, that was from the Hanson family.
Mm-hmm.
And the day before I was born, Fred Hanson, that was one of the sons of the Hanson boys, and his mother, Elisa, came over. And they brought him that clock.
Huh. So that came into the family one day before you did.
Yeah.
No? And we still have that clock.
One day older than I am.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And who were some of the neighbors then? I mean, like who were some of the neighbors who your parents knew and whose children you played with as you were growing up?
Well, there was the Tom Hansons, the Leitmachers. They were German people. They lived maybe a mile and a quarter, mile and a half from Tom Hanson's, going east. And then there was, of course, Martin Hanson's. That was the sloop. I guess used to be a sloop lived there or something.
Well, Martin Hanson's, that's not the Martin Hanson I knew, right? I mean,
yeah, Martin and Annie.
Martin and Annie. Okay, well, they were a bit older than you, right? Maybe Martin died in about 10 years ago, and he was in his 90s at that time. So
yeah,
he would have been 10 or 15 years older than you.
I think he was 96 when he died.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that would have been around 1985 or 6, thereabouts, yeah.
There's that time, well, I can tell you, that time Alice came with us to Switzerland.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And he was in the nursing home in Elgin then.
Uh-huh.
And they knew he wasn't going to, doctors had told him he won't be here long. And when we got over there to Switzerland, to Sollberger's, Alice called back here. And he had died then.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, he had told her to go anyway, even though he said, I may not be here when you come back, but you should go anyway, because that was her chance to see her Swiss relatives.
That's right, yeah.
Or, well, no, they were actually Norwegian, so that was, she was just there as a friend with you guys.
Annie, she was from Swiss. Her mother.
Oh, Annie was Martin's wife. So that was one of the blendings, a family that was half. The father was Norwegian, the mother Swiss, and all these people, when they met each other or talked or socialized, what language did they speak? I mean, like when.
If they could speak Swiss, they spoke Swiss.
Yeah, and did the Norwegians speak Norwegian?
And the Norwegians spoke Norwegian.
And then when your folks talked with the Hansons, what did they know a little of each other's language, or did they use some English, or how did they communicate?
Tom Hanson, he came from Norway.
Mm-hmm. He was like the head of the clan, is that right?
Yeah,
he was the first Hanson to come.
Yes. Evidently, his father died in Norway, is what I heard. I mean, this what they used to say. And so, I don't know what the reason was, but the mother came over here and brought him along,
Just by herself?
Yeah.
She hadn't remarried or anything?
No.
Uh-huh. That was a gutsy thing to do for a widow with a small child, to travel all the way from Norway to the frontier in Iowa.
They got here anyway.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But I don't, old Tom, he could, of course, his wife was Elisa Baumgartner, and so she was from a Swiss family.
Mm-hmm.
And she was just a little woman, and he was almost a giant.
Huh. Uh-huh.
But, as far back as I can remember him, I never saw that man do a day's work, but see, he had a bunch of kids that were grown up, and so all he did, he always got his Norwegian newspaper, and he had a great big room upstairs, and he'd always go up there and lay in bed and read, and sleep, I guess.
Now, this was
That was
a
just-
farmer on the Iowa frontier.
Yeah,
Huh? Well, that
was it.
doesn't sound like what I've heard about frontier life. Yeah. Well, it's from what you've told me about different people. There were all kinds of characters. I mean, some of these people were. Some of them were pretty eccentric, and some of them pushed the limits in various ways.
Yeah,
And others were very straight and narrow. And in a small community, everybody pretty much knew what everybody else was up to.
There was the Christen family. They came from Switzerland. It was Jay Christen's and I don't know, Grandma Christen. I don't know. I never knew her husband. He was dead, I guess, before I never knew him. And I know he didn't live as long as I was around her. And I was, because we went over there a lot. And Grandma Christen, she was from up there when you went from Leibach up into the hills there. Instead of going towards Slungendal, you'd go up through the back and up in the, it's nice up there, nice farms and everything.
This is in Switzerland.
And Grandma Christen, she came from up in there.
Yeah.
My dad used to go up there and work for a guy, but I don't remember the name. That was shingling houses or putting, he did that already before he came over here some. I think his dad they did that all by hand, shingles.
I wanted to ask you, when your dad went back to Switzerland in the winter, would he go back and live off of his earnings from Iowa, or would he work in Switzerland? Do some work?
I don't think that would just be from late November till March.
Yeah, a few months, and then he'd have to get back for spring planting.
Been over there, his parents were living in, and
But that's interesting that when you hear of people immigrating here from Europe, you think they came and then they stayed. And if he may have been typical in that a lot of the younger unmarried men may have worked during the harvest and the farming season and then gone home, just as today Mexican workers very often come to California and work and then
something like that.
go home part of the year to their families. So you went to school when you were 5 years old, is that right? Or how old were you when you started?
I think I was maybe 6 or maybe not 6 yet, because the school started like September, and I would have been 6.
Almost November. 6,
Because, but see, then before Christmas I got sick and I had pneumonia. Pneumonia.
In your first year of school?
Yeah.
So you missed some of your first year.
They had to have the doctor come out, and he said no more school, wait till next year.
Really? Oh, so from Christmas you didn't go back to school in your first year?
Well, I had 2 miles to go, and...
Well, where was your school, anyway? 2 miles from your house?
It was a 2-mile walk.
Well, what about the school bus? Didn't it pick you up?
There wasn't any.
There wasn't any?
No.
What kind of place was that? Yeah.
Well, back then kids dressed up warm and walked.
Yeah, okay, so... Where was that school? That school was north of where you lived, toward the Apostolic Cemetery, wasn't it? It was on...
Where the cemetery is. You go up the hill, and right when you get up on top of the hill, there was the school.
I remember I used to see that school in the 1940s when we would visit. It's torn down now.
It was there a long time, but finally it just caved in. And
it was a one-room red brick schoolhouse. And
it was built as a one-room, but then later, when I was in school, then they put a wall in, and the smaller grades were on one side, and then 6th, 7th, and 8th were on the other side of that wall.
So there were kindergarten and grades 1 through 8. Did the school have a name? Did they call it anything, or was it just the school?
Schoolhouse. I don't know if it had any name. I suppose it did.
Well, I remember we have some pictures, I think, of you and your classmates.
Yeah.
How many kids were there altogether from kindergarten through 8th grade? Maybe, I remember maybe 20 or 25 with...
Oh, I think it was maybe more like around 35, 40.
Mm-hmm. With one teacher?
No,
Oh.
it was divided, you know.
Oh, because, so there were 2 teachers.
At one time, I guess it was all one, but
Yeah.
that was maybe before I went to school. But
Mm-hmm.
or it was maybe while I was in school when they divided and put that wall in, and then I think it was 6th, 7th, and 8th grade were on the west side of the bit, you know, the west side, and the smaller ones on
Mm-hmm.
the east side where you'd come in the door.
Yeah. Well, after you had pneumonia, I mean, you couldn't go back and finish your first year. How many years did you go to that school? Or how did you attend that school?
Well, I went until we sold out and went to Switzerland.
Mm-hmm. Well, you were like 16 then, right?
Yeah.
So you would have been up through 8th grade in that school. So every year. And every day you would walk 2 miles to school and 2 miles back. And did you walk with anybody or were you alone?
Oh, no, Alice was going to school.
This is Alice Hansen.
And I don't know if Alma went to school then yet or not, but then there was Anna Dennler and Mabel.
So you would all meet on your way and walk together? All
Alice,
girls? Any boys? No?
Well, there was Gottlieb Dennler had a boy that was around my age. I don't know if he was a little older or younger. Clarence Dennler.
Mm-hmm.
We walked home together. Maybe this was before Alice went to school because it was, a nice fall day. People were digging potatoes. And we walked home. And he could have down by the bridge instead of going up the Hofer Hill. Like I had to go up the Hofer Hill and then go south.
So that's right, yeah.
It's going up to where...
Well, from the school you go down into kind of a valley with the creek, and then you go up the Hofer Hill, and then you head south toward 56.
Come out up there by Al Dennler if you keep going.
Right.
But
so instead of his going up the Hofer Hill, what did he do? This was Clarence Dennler.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, see, he walked on with me. I don't know if Alice maybe wasn't even in school then, or because she's younger, than I am too. So the 2 of us walked home, and as he could have went down by the bridge before you go up over. He sometimes went up that kind of a valley,
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, he walked up there with me, and then when we got up, like where Gottlieb's house was up there, we walked this little farther. Then there was a road going down to the right, and that's where Gottlieb Dennler first settled.
That was down in that valley.
Yeah, it was in that valley.
Go down to that, yeah.
And then Jake Dennler's, they were just a little farther back yet.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe in 10 minutes you could have walked from one place to the other.
Yeah.
But then when we got up that hill, of course that boy, he said, he went down the road then and went home. When I came home, they were jumping around and all excited.
You mean at your house?
Yeah.
Your folks.
And they said, Clarence just got killed.
My God.
And
Yeah.
he walked home with me.
And they, by the time you got home, your folks, was there a telephone? Had they been?
Oh, yeah.
They had
telephones. You had to crank them to ring them, You didn't have all this automatic stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But they just...
How old were you at that time?
I believe it was around 11.
Yeah. What happened to Clarence? How did he get killed?
Well, it was early fall. I mean, they were digging potatoes. And of course, Gottlieb's had a big family, Must have been 10, 11 kids altogether. Mm-hmm. And of course, there's some died in too. They weren't all living, and they brought home a load of potatoes. And the house was sitting here, and you always had, and then this little farther down, or well, real close, there was a spring house.
Mm-hmm.
They'd separate in there, and I think she'd do the washing down there. In summer, they kind of use it as a summer kitchen.
Yeah.
Instead of using the house. But when they were brought home potatoes, and they had a load of potatoes there, and then I suppose after they got the milking and everything done, they would put them in the basement. Well, Clarence, I think he was 11 or somewhere around that. And when he got in the house, his mother gave him a pan or a bucket or something, told him to go and get potatoes from the wagon. And when he got down there, he must have climbed up the wheels. You know, they got them spokes.
Yeah.
And it was just evidently just parked a few feet, not too far from that spring house. And when he climbed up those, whatever you call it,
The spokes, yeah.
spokes, the doggone thing started to go backwards. And he got his head in between that spring house and the
wheel, or the wagon.
Or the wheel, whatever.
So his
Anyway,
head was crushed.
They said his head was crushed.
Huh.
So it was maybe the wheel that did it, or
Yeah.
if he. And of course, he was just 11 years old. I don't know, but she gave him a bucket or a pan. He was, when they had quite a large family. He was supposed to bring potatoes up in the kitchen. She was going to peel them and get them for supper. So.
How did that make you feel to hear that so suddenly about this boy you just been with him a few minutes before?
I don't know.
Did it make you think about dying, or that something like that could happen to you if it could happen to him, or?
I don't know what I was thinking.
Yeah.
I know it scared me to death, but I can't just say.
It would be scary having been with somebody who was alive, and then next thing.
Yeah, sure, it would be.
No longer with us.
Yeah, I know it.
When you went to school, did you speak English at all, or?
Not when I started.
So you knew only Schweizerdeutsch. You learned it at home. Branddeutsch. And so you spoke that with the neighbors, and how much, before you went to school, how much did you see other kids? Did you have much, did you play with other kids, or was it hard to get back and forth between the farms?
Well, then Harry and Liddy would come back. They were older than I was. They'd come back, I think, about every week. Just to, they probably had enough help at home. They didn't have to do much, and they were just kids.
What was their last name?
Jake Dennler.
Dennler. So Harry and Liddy.
Yeah,
they were
the two youngest.
These were the youngest kids who were about your age.
Well, they evidently had another one about 2 days before I was born, but that died. So it was.
Well, when kids were born out there probably wasn't a doctor there, right? I mean, was there a midwife, or how? Who helped the mother give birth? I mean, was it a doctor or a midwife or a neighbor lady, or how?
Usually, I think. See, my mother had all that training.
She had training. She was, I think, your mother. We'd probably call her a midwife today, right? She had training in.
She had that training.
Assisting medically and stuff, yeah.
And,
did she sometimes go and help women who were giving birth?
Yeah.
She would do that, I see.
And Martin Hanson's had a baby every time. Why, they'd come or call or something, and she'd have to go down there.
Yeah.
I don't know if they even had a doctor come out too or not at that time, but and then when Louise, that was Jake Dennler's daughter, she was the oldest one, I guess. And I was already bigger then, of course, when that happened. She worked for her uncle, Ben Hofer. He was a brother to Louise's mother. And of course, Ben was his wife had died, and he had 2 boys and a girl, 2 boys and 2 girls, I guess. And so he wanted her to come over there and work. Well, you had to have somebody with those kids, And so, of
just
course,
to help with cooking and cleaning
yeah,
and stuff like that.
then Ben got Louise into trouble.
Uh-huh.
And I remember...
How old was she at that time?
Oh, well, she was... That was that Lalo she had. Well, she was actually the oldest one of the family anyway. But I couldn't tell you just... She was in
Jake Dennler's?
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
She was maybe...
Probably a teenager or... Right.
Well, I imagine she would have been more than that.
Uh-huh.
I couldn't tell you just exactly, but she...
Did she marry him then, or
no, he was her uncle.
Oh, he was her
I
uncle?
don't think they could even get married. No, he was her uncle.
Mm-hmm.
He was a brother to Louise's mother.
Okay.
She was a Holford too, yeah.
So this was her, yeah. And what happened to the baby, or what happened to her?
Well, I don't... well, I think Rob Lehman's... Mrs. Rob Lehman, I'm not sure. Hofer Lehman. I think Mrs. Rob Lehman's, they took that one youngster in and raised it. But Louise worked over there at Ben, see?
Mm-hmm, yeah.
And of course, then first thing she had, that Leo, that Lalo they called him.
Mm-hmm.
And that he was drinking, and I mean he grew up and everything, and he was a good worker, and they had plenty of work on the farm there because Jake Dennler.
You mean with the people who had adopted him?
Yeah.
Leo, the son. Yeah.
And he, I don't know.
Well, did people treat him differently because,
I
of
don't
the fact that
I don't really think so.
Mm-hmm.
I just know that, well, he grew up there. Louise stayed home then, when she was expecting that baby, and
well, was there a lot of...
he grew
Did
up
people
there.
talk about that, or was there a lot of shame associated with that, or did
I
people...
don't know.
Was her family...
It was talked about,
I suppose,
all right,
yeah.
but then that's the way it was, and there was
Mhm.
nothing. He went to school and everything, but see, then after he was out on his own, he started to, I suppose, run around with some other kids and got drunk, and I think he got killed some way, and I don't know just if it was with the car, or I don't remember how he got... Can't remember that.
Yeah, well...
I don't think he was married, not that I can remember.
Mm-hmm. Well, out there in the hills, east of Elgin, I mean, what did people on Sundays go to church, or was there no church very close by? I mean, there was the Apostolic Church, but your family wasn't a member of that, right?
No, but we went over there.
Oh, you went to services. Did you go every Sunday? Or did you go every Sunday to the Apostolic Church, or just sometimes, or on special days?
Quite a bit, but maybe not just every Sunday.
Yeah, and you go with a horse and buggy, or?
Well, no, well, that was, of course, later on. We were living right next to it.
Well, yeah, later on.
But then when we were there on the farm,
Mm-hmm.
I don't think we went to church.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Was Sunday, well, I can see why, people might not go to church because there wasn't anything close by. And what was Sunday like, though? Was it a work day, or did people treat it specially, by taking the day off, or having a special dinner, or family get-togethers?
Try to have something special for on Sundays. And
what was...
always butchered a rooster, and that was supposed to be...
Oh, so you'd have kind of a special meal.
Yeah.
Was that at noon or in the evening?
At noon.
At noon.
Yeah. But I think when we were on the farm, he was there 15 years in that place.
Mm-hmm.
15 to 16, somewhere around there.
Mm-hmm.
I went down to that apostolic Sunday school.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, not every Sunday in winter. I couldn't go; it was too far. And you got snowed in. Crabs used to have snow drifts. You high as this building here some winters when. But most people, Hansons, they went to the Norwegian church when they were.
Where was that?
Well, that was east of our place, over the hill, and there was a.
It was a Lutheran church, I suppose.
Yeah, it was a Lutheran church.
Did any Swiss people go to that, or was it just really Norwegians?
Mostly Norwegians.
So I'll bet the service was in Norwegian, probably.
Yeah.
The sermon and the hymns
I
and
went
stuff.
down to the apostolic church for Sunday school.
And that was a Swiss church.
Yeah.
I see.
But not in winter time. You couldn't go that far. And roads used to be closed. Sometimes, heck, they wouldn't come out Elgin and open them like they do nowadays.
I guess they didn't have
They put
snowplows. Yeah.
Fences down some places and go over the ridges, but then you couldn't go through everybody's place either, I remember that we had snow and storms and wind, and our road from the house up to the...
And that was going uphill from the house up to
going
the main road.
That was filled up, I bet that was 6-8 feet deep.
Well, I can remember seeing that. There was kind of a hollow there, so I
it's
imagine
a
it would
hollow
drift
through there.
very deeply.
And so you just couldn't, and then the roads too. Later in years, then the Elgator would come up through there and clean, but for when we lived there was nobody.
Yeah, well, you were there from around 1910 to 1925 or 26,
26
in that spot.
Yeah.
Well, and I remember you telling me a story about either it was Gottlieb or Jacob Dennler who started making weekly trips into Chicago.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, what was that? That's sort of an interesting story. Who was that? Jacob or Gottlieb?
That was Gottlieb.
Gottlieb. Okay, so that was one of your dad's older brothers.
Yeah.
And so he was there farming in Cherry Valley and had his family, but he would go back to Switzerland by himself, right? During the winters at times to see the family and.
He did. That was, of course, when I was little. I just know that I've heard it.
So he would leave his family on the farm.
He left his family on the farm.
I guess the older boys could,
they were probably
keep the wood fires.
Certain time of the year to do the work, but well, I don't know.
Well, the story you told me was that he met a young woman in Switzerland who was like a chambermaid or who worked in a hotel.
That's right, in a hotel,
And so he what did he do? Talk her or invite her into coming to this country?
Is that going to be on tape?
Oh, it sure is, yeah.
I wouldn't hardly dare say things.
Well, I think everybody who's involved in that story is no longer alive, so I don't think anybody's feelings would be hurt.
That's true too.
Yeah.
Of course, Ben and Sam, I suppose they were big enough and to farm, to take.
And the Ben, that's the Ben Dennler who I knew when I was growing up. Okay, yeah.
They.
So Gottlieb was Ben's.
Gottlieb could get
father.
away, and the boys would take over. I suppose it was probably usually after the crops were in and everything that he would go. But he went. He had him and Ben Frieden had some kind of a setup where they'd leave on Saturday and go to Chicago. They'd drive their horses over to Erdesheen and leave them there. And then from there they'd take, I guess, a train.
I suppose,
it was
to
a
Chicago.
train that came from Chicago and then went up along the river, And but he was over in Switzerland and he met this, I guess she was in a hotel where you come in and register, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, he talked her into coming over here. He maybe, I don't know, maybe he paid her a trip. I don't know that, but she was pretty well educated, so she, I guess, thought that would be, well, it was probably all right. But then he left her in Chicago.
What did she do in Chicago then?
Well, he got her a job as with some rich people. I don't know if they take care of couple little kids or something, something like that.
Yeah.
And of course he came home, but then she was after him, and after him she'd write all the time. She wanted to come and see where he lives.
Mm-hmm.
But,
Did she know he had a wife and family?
No.
Oh, she didn't.
That was the thing.
That was the thing.
That,
But every weekend, he and Levi Frieden, you say, would.
Not Levi, but Ben Frieden.
Ben Frieden.
Ben was the father of Levi Frieden. Yeah.
And they'd go into Chicago.
Yeah,
and
that's what I used to.
And how did they explain their trips to people? That wasn't common. People didn't usually go into Chicago every weekend.
They had to leave their horses there in Prairie, I guess, and then take a train to Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
But they must have paid somebody they surely had to have somebody take care of them and feed them. And I suppose, if they just stayed over the weekend or from Saturday till Sunday, I don't.
Mm-hmm.
And Marie, she, of course, was getting anxious. She wanted to come and see where he lives.
Mm-hmm.
And he kept putting her off and putting her off. And he didn't know because he had a wife. And
so he didn't want her showing up.
Yeah.
Probably, yeah.
But she just hounded him, evidently. So finally, he saw that, let's see, what was his name? Well, it was a brother to Frank Christen and Jay Christen, but I can't think of his name now. And he was single yet, he wasn't married. So finally he talked to that guy and told him he could get him, he wanted a wife, he could get him one, a real nice lady, and she was in Chicago, and of course she wanted to come there to Gottlieb, but being he had a wife and kids, I guess that wasn't going to work out too good. And finally, I guess, I don't know if his name was Hans or, well, it was a Christen anyway, one of the Christen boys. Well, anyway, finally, Gottlieb made a deal with him to buy him a china cabinet.
Oh, that the Christen man had to buy Gottlieb a china cabinet in exchange for
a wife.
A wife. Yeah.
Well, that's what they always said.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And she went along with this.
Yeah.
I mean, in other words,
that Marie Tice was her last name, Marie Tice.
Mm-hmm. So she came to Elgin and married the man that Gottlieb had lined her up with.
Oh yeah. They got married all right, and of course that Christen had to buy him that nice. And I tell you, it was a cabinet with glass, and she had dishes in it, and then down below it was like a desk. You could have drawers and could pull out and I think everybody knew about that.
How about Gottlieb's wife? Did she know, or was she in pretty much? I remember you were saying she was a little bit in the dark and maybe a little on the dense side.
I think she just took things as they came. It didn't bother her.
Well, yeah.
Maybe
that's the way to be. Yeah.
Unless somebody else would have told her, but I suppose maybe everybody kept their mouth shut.
Well, it seemed to work out then. Finally.
Yeah, I guess
could have been a very difficult situation.
It did.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like Gottlieb was sort of a wheeler dealer. What we call kind of a slickster.
That's exactly what he was.
And
he had
He was a good
he
kind
was different than
Uh-huh.
Jake Dennler or my dad. He was
what was Jake like in comparison to him?
Oh, Jake was kind of a quiet. And of course, when I was born, he had a lot of big kids already, you know, grown up, some of them. So I don't know, as far as I know, as long as I knew him, he never did much work. Oh, he'd putter around and do something, you know, but not because he had enough kids to work in the fields. And
so he could be kind of easygoing.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
was Gottlieb more sort of a sort of a pusher and
Yeah.
getting stuff done?
Yeah. Well, Gottlieb was only 14 when he came here, and there was some Millenthaler. It must have been Bleienbach has Millenthalers, but my dad, I know once when we talked about it, he didn't know this. There were several families, but it must have been the Millenthaler from one of them families that came over here. Of course, that's long, long ago, and just what happened from there on, I don't know.
Well, Gottlieb probably had to fight pretty hard if he came over as a 14-year-old just to make his way. So he was kind of he had to become kind of a
he told
fighter, wheeler dealer.
I heard that he used to come back once in a while, and they get to talking about those things, and he would say he'd have to get up at, I don't know if it was 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning. This Millenthaler brought him here, put him on a farm, and then he had to go to school. And he said he used to go through the snow or everything, and his pants would be wet clear up to his knees, and he said, and he had to sleep in an ice cold room, no heat or nothing. Well, that made him tough, I guess.
I guess so, yeah.
But
I think you had to be tough to survive then, out there in those hills. They didn't have central heating, and doctors weren't just around the corner, and hospitals were. Where was the nearest hospital? Maybe Elgin.
There wasn't. Back then there probably wasn't any hospital too close. We had doctors in every town, Claremont and Elgin. But as far as hospitals, there was nothing that I can remember around there. Even when I know we went to the doctor in Claremont, but for me, and one time or 2 times in Elgin to one, but.
Can you remember any of the doctors' names back then?
No, I don't think so.
Because later on there was a Dr. Jerdee, wasn't there? But that was maybe in the 20s or 30s.
Well, Jerdee, I was at, Jerdee and Dr. Carr were in Claremont. Dr. Carr, Jerdee, he came from Norway.
Oh,
He was quite a serious, he get kind of rough with you too. I don't know, I stepped in a nail once.
Yeah.
Well, the nail, it was in the woodshed, and my dad, I don't know what he made, but it had some wood laying there, and I probably didn't look too good, and there was a nail sticking through, and I happened to just step, and the thing went right through my sole and into my foot. And that was in the evening, and I tell you that I had pain all night in that little foot. The next morning we had to go up there to Jerdee, and everybody else said they didn't like him. He's so darn rough. But he took a hold of that leg, and he had some stuff, and he dug into that hole with that nail and cleaned that out.
Without any painkiller or anesthetic. Did that hurt?
Yeah, it did hurt.
But evidently he got the infection out, because you're still here.
He
You didn't get typhoid or anything.
He learned his trade in Norway. See, I think he was a good doctor. A lot of people liked him, but he was just a little on the rough side sometimes. Dr. Carr had his office right there too. Of course, he was altogether different, but once in a while they said he drank a little too much, and some people We're afraid, he might give him the wrong medicine.
Yeah, so you could take your choice.
Yeah.
And,
Then-
well, at least you had a choice.
Then we had,
Could have had
but
just one doctor.
This was, of course, later than we had Dr. Wolf. Came
That
from
was later,
Chicago,
right?
Yeah, I believe he died too. Well, I guess he was old enough. He's not in Elgin anymore.
Mhm.
I kind of think he died. Been retired for a long, long time anyway. But I don't think Elgin don't have any. West Union and Boatesville, they got doctors, and so I guess can't have doctors in every town either. But
Yeah, well, I'd like to talk to you a little bit just about when you started school. I mean, so you didn't know a word of English, is that right?
No, I didn't.
And did they teach in English? Was that, or did they teach in Swiss German? Or
No, that was Maud Patterson was the teacher.
it doesn't sound like a Swiss name,
No,
Maud Patterson.
She was from Elgin. Well,
What was her approach with like, here's a 6-year-old coming in who doesn't know a word of English?
yeah. Well,
What was that like? Was that difficult for you?
I wasn't the only one. There
Yeah,
were others that. Except the only thing was, if one had some sisters and brothers that were older and went to school, then the littler ones at home would pick up.
Would sort of pass down the
Yeah.
line. But you didn't have that.
No, I didn't have
You
that.
were an only child, and
Well,
so
I-
it really hit you just there.
yeah.
Well, probably some of the kids you played with, maybe.
Well, they
had
could
some.
all speak Swiss.
Yeah.
But, of course, the teacher didn't speak. That was Maud Patterson.
Well,
Was her
did
name
you
right?
sometimes speak English in the classroom, and then among yourselves speak Swiss
Yeah, we'd speak Swiss.
in the schoolyard or on the way to and
Schoolyard,
from?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. They
Well, like with the Hanson children, when you walk to and from school, what would you
spoke
speak?
English with them.
Yeah.
Martin didn't speak. He understood all the Swiss, but they just didn't speak
Didn't
it.
speak it.
But Annie spoke it. And then,
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
And then Annie's mother was living with him that time, and she didn't speak English, so they kind of learned the Swiss. Alice and them kind of learned the Swiss from Grandma and Annie, I guess, and
Yeah. Well,
but
you know.
they could understand them anyway.
Yeah.
But
Well, I can remember when I was little, growing up, you and Dad, this was in Marion in the or Cedar Rapids and in Marion in the early 1940s, you would speak, Berndeutsch a lot.
yeah.
But, you'd speak English sometimes, but you'd also speak Swiss German. But then, as years passed, I think you spoke less and less in German and more in English.
Yeah, well, I suppose there really wasn't anybody around that spoke.
Yeah, there weren't any other, you didn't really have a community
Yeah.
of people who shared the language at that point.
Yeah.
But do you remember what it felt like going to school, and did you feel scared about having to learn English, or did it worry you, or do you have any memories of starting to learn English at all?
Oh, I guess I really should have went up to the school up in 56. Because the line went right
Oh,
by our yard, and I was on that side.
you were on
of
that
it.
side.
But that was all Irish up there, mostly up on that 56.
I see.
I don't hardly
So-
think there would have been a kid there that could speak English. That was all. just
So your
different.
parents wanted you to go
Well,
to the other school where they probably knew the
my dad, I
they knew
guess,
the parents of the children who were going there.
according to the way it was laid out, I should have went up to 56. But then my dad must have talked to whoever was, what do you call it, of the school?
The school board, probably.
School board, yeah. And they said, well, as long as it's only one, they would let me come. But they, I suppose didn't want to have a dozen.
Yeah.
And of course, those kids all spoke Swiss. There was Baumgartners and Schippachs and Bietekover and Landsakes, Habecker and Friedrich and
Well, that's, this was
Frieden.
an interesting situation because the parents were all speaking their Berndeutsch.
Yeah.
And many of them never learned much English, I think, the parents, right? I mean, like, your mom and dad, I think, never spoke much English,
My
right?
dad did.
Did he?
Oh, yeah.
Well, I
Mom
hardly...
didn't. She'd understand it all, but she wouldn't talk.
She wouldn't talk, yeah. And yet you learned English very well. When you speak English, you don't have a trace of an accent. I mean, you wouldn't guess that you had, learned English as a second language. But of course, you were very young at a time when I think you can acquire a new language without
I
much.
started school before I was 6, but then I got pneumonia, and the doctor said this was in November. I think it was before Christmas anyway, or even before Thanksgiving, and the doctor said they'd have to keep me home this winter because I was too. I don't know.
Well, maybe they just felt you were a little frail, or they didn't want you.
Something like that. I guess.
Well, my gosh, 6 years old. That's walking 2 miles each way through the winter.
Yeah.
And would it be dark in the winter days when you'd come home?
Yeah, sometimes.
Yeah. Would you be afraid? I mean, were there wolves or anything?
Yeah, there were wolves.
There were wolves in the hills.
Yeah, I'd hear those wolves howling,
As you came home.
Yeah.
Only at night or during the day too?
Well, mostly at night, in the evening. But in winter it gets dark awful.
Sure.
Yeah, I know.
So you'd be walking and you'd hear.
My dad would sometimes, I suppose, Mom would make him come and meet me. And it would be dark about from the time we got up by Gottlieb's there, or past Gottlieb's, and then of course I still had to go back 2 miles or maybe almost more.
Well, I know it's a good stretch. I've driven that many times.
Then go down the hill to the house,
Yeah.
Well, those days are all over.
Well, somehow people got to school and learned what they needed to learn.
Yeah.
What sorts of things did you study in school, or do you remember some, things that you
I had
studied?
To start and write the ABC. And 1, 2, 3.
Well, that's probably where you began learning English, right? Learning to count, just the way a lot of people learn a new language.
Then when I started school, of course, Alice, they were little yet.
This is Alice Hansen.
Yeah, they weren't all. So either Mom or my dad would come with me, part ways, and then if it was like fall or if it wasn't too much snow, I could cut down through that one pasture there instead of going clear over and then down. Kind of
cut off the road and then take a shortcut through the pasture.
And, then Johnny Dennler, of course, Liddy was a little older than I am, but about 3 years or something, but I don't remember her and Harry so much, but Johnny would see there was a creek going down through there, and he'd come down to that creek there, and he was a big, long-legged guy, and he'd wait there at that creek and help me. If it didn't rain, I could get across by stepping on a few rocks, but if it rained, then maybe. But he'd come down to the creek, and then away we'd go. He'd take me by my hand and walk me to school.
So he was sort of a gentle giant.
Oh, I suppose Johnny Dennler, I think there was Johnny Dennler and Walter Beatty Cofer and Fred Beatty Cofer. And there was another Beatty Cofer. It wasn't George, but there was another one. I forget what the name was. There were 4 brothers there, and they were all in school there, great big fools, really. And here we had Maud Patterson.
I mean, these were teenagers, big boys.
They really didn't belong in school anymore, but I think they just sent them to get rid of them or something. And one day...
well, Maud Patterson, she was probably pretty young herself, right? Or was she older?
That was her first teacher.
I see.
There, And I think we had her 2 years anyway. But then one day, I was beginning to understand a little English, I guess. I was supposed to take my tablet out anyway, and I don't know if we're supposed to draw something or what. But when I reached in the desk, I didn't look. I just reached, and there was something in there. And I started to cry. And the teacher came down and she wanted to know what was the matter, what was the matter, why I was crying. And I didn't say anything, I guess. And so she reached in, was going to get my tablet or maybe the book out. And there, them damn boys had put a dead rat in there.
Oh! Not just a mouse, but a rat.
Yeah, it was a rat.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, it was a rat.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like they belonged in school.
Well, see,
Did they do that to other kids too? I mean, play pranks or just
they
cut
were
up?
always doing something, you know. They
Yeah.
were. It was Walter Biddycove and Fred, and there were about 4 boys, great big buggers, you know. They really didn't belong there, but I think the folks just sent them to get rid of them.
Well, could Maud Patterson keep them under control? She was probably hardly any older than they were, or just a few years.
She was just kind of a little person, and I don't know, she didn't have much control over him. No doubt. I know a couple of times the superintendent came out from Elgin, and evidently that had something to do about if it was those boys or some others later on. But I can't remember just what in the heck, can't remember just how that ended up, but I know there was talk about it. My dad heard about it. But yeah, them boys, you know, they were big.
But when you reached in for your tablet, did you know what was there, or did you just feel something scary?
I felt something that was there. I don't know if I looked or not, but I just started to cry.
Yeah.
Well, it was a rat.
Yeah.
They got a long tail.
Yeah.
She came down.
You knew something was wrong.
She sat down with me, and what's the matter? And I don't know. I was even afraid to say anything, I guess. And so she finally reached in, and she got a hold of. So then she knew, I guess. Well, when them big boys were in school there, they just didn't belong there anymore. I think the folks just sent them to get rid of them. They didn't come like in the fall or spring when they were supposed to help and all.
I see, yeah.
But just through the few winter months. And then we didn't have any water at the school either. Well,
no pump or...
not when I started. Later on, they did put a pump in it, but then for a few years there.
For a bathroom, what? There was just an outhouse?
Well, there were 2 outhouses, one for boys and one for girls.
Was there a playground?
Well, yeah, we had pretty good size.
What did you have? Did you have any equipment or
no,
ball diamond?
not really.
Or did kids play baseball?
Some of the kids just played baseball, or they had other, for the smaller kids, other games that they would play.
Did you play Fox and Geese?
I don't remember.
That's a game I remember from growing up. I wondered if kids of your generation played it.
I don't know. I can't remember just what.
Where you make a big circle in the snow and then, sort of spokes of a wheel, and one person would be it, and he'd be the fox and the other kids would be the geese, and you'd have to stay on that circle of the spokes.
Later on, I mean, we had a pretty good sized playground there, you know, but later we played baseball out there in recess.
So that was, baseball with a bat and a ball and 3 bases, and so that's interesting that Swiss American and Norwegian American kids were playing baseball, just sort of shortly after their families got off the boat, coming over.
We just had to play something that somebody knew how to do it, I guess.
Did you have a sled, or did kids go sledding in the winter on those hills?
I had a sled. I never brought mine to school because by the time we got out, I had to head for home. And at noon, by the time we took our lunch, we didn't have hot lunch like we have nowadays. By the time we ate our lunch, it was, in winter time, she didn't give us a whole hour off. Because it would have been, it was dark anyway. By the time I walked 2 miles.
What would you have for lunch? Would your mother pack you a lunch?
We had a regular lunch bucket, and
Mm-hmm.
there was bread with butter and something in it. I don't know.
Mhm.
I can't. And there was always some banana or oranges or
Oh, you could
apples.
get fruit like bananas and
Oh
oranges.
yeah,
And, yeah.
we could buy that in town.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I don't. Crackers or cookies, I guess, or cake sometimes. And,
Mhm.
and I think first when I went, I just had a lunchbox. But then when I was a little bigger, I had one with where you could have a thermos bottle.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Had something.
Mhm.
Mom used to put broth in it.
Uh-huh.
And sometimes if you put in coffee with milk, it got kind of, I don't know, curdled or funny. I don't know what it was, but I didn't like that.
Did your folks drink coffee at home, or what did they
Yeah,
drink? Uh-huh.
yeah, we had coffee.
Did you drink coffee when you were a little girl, or with
Not
your
when
folks?
I was little, but after I got up, I don't know, maybe 12, 13, I
Yeah.
started to drink some too.
Yeah. And your school, how was that heated? Was it a wood stove or a fireplace, or?
There was, evidently there was a big wood stove there. That I don't remember, but I know that after I had started, I don't know just how long it was, if it was a couple of years or 3, they put a furnace in.
Oh. Uh-huh.
But see, it had to be right in the schoolroom.
I see.
There was no basement
Yeah.
under it.
Uh-huh.
But that was hard to heat that building.
I imagine, yeah, because up on that hill, the wind
Yeah.
would just whip
From
around
all
there. I imagine.
directions,
Yeah.
that wind would come. And the windows too, well, they were all right, but there was no storm windows on them.
Oh, it was just single pane
Yeah.
glass. Yeah. So I'll bet everybody was wearing sweaters and
Yeah.
bundled up during the
Well,
cold winter
yeah.
months. Yeah.
Yeah, you had to. Mom used to knit stockings. I'd wear those woolen stockings. Well, I wasn't the only one. Other kids wore them too.
Yeah.
But if you just went like they do nowadays, you'd have froze to death.
Yeah. Did the kids dress pretty much alike or the same, or were some kids,
Similar.
dressed better than others in terms of store-bought clothes or homemade, or was
Oh,
pretty much the same across
I
the board?
suppose a lot of it was homemade back then, more
Mhm.
so than nowadays. But some of them there, Dan Petticoffers and Johnny Petticofer, they had a lot of kids, 8, 9, 10 kids in a family. That's shipbox.
So there'd be hand-me-downs, probably. The little ones
I
would
suppose.
inherit clothes from the bigger ones.
Shipbox, there was Ruth and Neoma and George. Ruth was a year older than I am, and then Neoma was a year younger than I was, or I don't remember how. I know Ruth was a year older than I was. I should have really started. Well, I started, but then I got pneumonia, see, and then I had to quit the rest of the year. So then the next year, I would have been in Ruth's class if I could have continued. But then, being I didn't go, I had to start over again. Then I was in Neoma's class.
Uh-huh.
And, well, it didn't make any difference, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, and when we made the trip over to Switzerland, I went to school that fall.
Mm-hmm.
I was 16 then.
And that was still the same schoolhouse
Yeah,
up
same
on the hill.
schoolhouse, yeah. But we
Well,
had
yeah.
Frida Freiberghaus was teacher then. And I believe that was her 3rd year then. And that was altogether different. She was that Ma Patterson too, she couldn't. Them boys, they were bigger than she was, and shucks, they did all kinds of damn things around there. Then we didn't have water at the schoolhouse. So there was a bucket and some glasses or something there. But then they'd send them big boys, a couple of them. They just had to cross the road and go down. Oh, it didn't take them more than 10, 15 minutes. There was a pump there. There's a pasture, but there was a pump there. They'd go down there and get the water.
Uh-huh.
Well, then it got around that they pissed in it.
I'm sure they did, probably.
Yeah, I suppose they did. And I guess they got a big laugh out of it.
Oh. What other kinds of things did they do? Or
Oh, gosh, I don't know. I can't remember too much just what all went on.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so, your parents and the parents of the kids you went to school with, they were all native speakers of
Yeah.
Swiss and Norwegian, and then you all knew it, but you also learned English.
Yeah.
And
I had to learn English when I started in school then.
Well, now in Elgin, there are very few people who speak Swiss, German, or Norwegian. What do you think happened? I mean, because you still know Swiss German. I mean, if we brought someone from Bleinbach here, you could speak fluently with them in that language.
Could, yeah.
And because I've heard you talking on the phone to relatives, and but you don't use it much at all now.
No, you don't really. There's really.
Well, who understands it? Yeah,
That's.
But do you think that there are still many people in Elgin now who, of your age maybe, in their 70s or 80s, who maybe have that language in their background, or
Well, I'm sure there's some, but when I look at the Elgin Echo, there are names I never heard of. But not very many Swiss names in there anymore in the news part.
And that's different even from 40 or 50 years ago, right? I mean, because I remember when I was a kid, this would have been in the 1940s and 50s, there were still a lot of the people you grew up with were there, and those names, Schippak and Torkelson, and that must have been Norwegian, I suppose, but there were a lot of these names you've been mentioning.
Frieden and
Frieden,
Frederick,
and,
Baumgartner, and 2-3 families of Baumgartners, and there was Schipachs, and there's several families of Bidikofers. There was Dan Bidikofer family. They had 9 or 10 kids. Then Johnny Bidikofer's just below. That's just from the cemetery a little east. There's where Johnny's live. And of course they spoke Swiss, and that Bidikofer. That was a Swiss name,
Yeah.
Then there were Schmidts across the street there from Bidikofers. Of course they just had Marie, but. She could speak Swiss and she could speak English.
Yeah.
But then Levi Fried was when he went down the road, down along the river there that'd be from the cemetery going east.
Going east past Schmidt's,
Yeah. There was Levi Fried down there. He was married to Alda Dennler, Gottlieb's daughter. Then there was Emil Moore's up to the right, up in the hill. Well, Emil Moore, of course, he could speak Swiss. He was from a Swiss family, but his wife she didn't understand. She was from Minnesota. Cora, I think, was her name. And he was up in Minnesota. I don't know if he had a brother or sister living up there, and I suppose he met her up there, and they got married. But she was a nice gal, but like I say, she didn't. Unless she learned after she lived there, I don't know.
Well, it sounds like the sons and daughters of these early settlers, like Jacob Dennler and Gottlieb, and these people, the Hansons, they pretty much stayed close to Elgin. I mean, they intermarried and started their own families and stayed around Elgin.
Yeah.
And it's in the later generations that, I think a lot of these people have moved to different parts of the country.
Nowadays, they're moving away, Well, I tell you, if you look at the Elgin Echo, I guess there's not many there's names in there I never heard before. I don't know.
How does that make you feel? Does it make you feel sad, or do you care? Or
much difference to me, I guess. It's just things change.
Things change, yeah.
It can't stay forever the same. That wouldn't work either. We used to have 2 doctors in Elgin there for years. Dr. Hatzel, and then that other one that was right back where that new place is now, that, what they call it. Oh, can't even say it.
Senior citizen housing or
No.
new? Or
no,
what?
they just
new
built
place?
that library.
The library, yeah.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
That's there was a doctor. Let's see, what was Goldfather or something. Father was his name. He's just a little fellow. But he just had the office in his house there.
Uh-huh.
I was there different times. I don't know what I had, a cold or something, I suppose. But then Dr. Hatzel, he was upstairs over the bank on Main Street. And I was there too, once or twice that I can remember. Oh, I used to be scared of those doctors. Then the dentist was Hutchinson. And I remember when I had to go to him.
Yeah.
Oh dear.
But you never had many cavities, did you? You had pretty good.
Not in my second
you don't
teeth.
you don't have any false teeth, do you?
No.
You have your
I got all
teeth
my
you were born with, yeah.
I had my first teeth, the back ones.
Your baby teeth, yeah.
Baby teeth, they got cavities. And then I had to come to that doctor and have them taken. Well, as long as they didn't hurt, I kept them. But once you had toothache all the time, but then the darn things were just hanging on a little.
Oh, yeah.
They didn't have roots like the second teeth do. But I was still scared and screamed.
Did they give you a treat or anything? A little candy or anything? What were some of the other stores or businesses that you remember in Elgin when you would go in there? Because you wrote a little thing about growing up and talk about Saturdays being the day that you'd go to town.
Well, that was just through the week. They stayed home and worked. On Saturday, you had to go. You had to take the eggs to town. You had chickens,
You'd sell the eggs.
Sell the eggs, then you'd buy your groceries with the egg money. And I don't know. You had to go to the bank sometime, I guess, and I don't know. Had to buy groceries for the week again.
Yeah.
And
was that a time to socialize? I mean, would families from all around town come in on Saturday and
Saturdays,
get to talk together? And
Saturdays was usually a good day where you'd meet a lot of the neighbors, or then you get them. You didn't have any mail delivery back then either.
Oh, really?
Not in the country.
So you would pick up your mail in town once a week? Then usually if Hansons went to town, or Christens or Martins, or we did, we'd always go in before we go home then and get our mail. And then we'd ask if anybody picked up, Hansons or Christens. Or so you might get your neighbor's mail.
Bring it all home, and then we'd let them know that we got their mail. And of course, once in a while it happened that maybe Christians were in and took theirs and whatever. But
did you get much mail from Switzerland, from relatives? Writing to your mother and father.
Yeah, they used to write over there, and they send letters over, and they get letters from there. And Bertha Betty Lemaire from France, she used to always write. And Bummets would write, Laurie, and that was my mother.
So there was mail, and they were writing to them back in Switzerland, I suppose.
My mother, there's six sisters in that family, and 3 brothers, so there was always somebody writing, or either my mother wrote to them, or and they'd write back and forth like that.
Yeah. Did your folks subscribe to any Swiss language newspapers or magazines? Would there be?
Yeah, my dad had Swiss. Well, it was actually German. I think it came from Minneapolis. It was a German.
So for German-speaking people, newspaper.
And
was that every week that would come?
Yeah, it was a regular weekly paper. Yeah. And then my mother had that Hausfrau, I know, as far back as I could remember. And I don't know, it seems like my dad had another one I know one time he got one from I believe it came out of New York. It was a German paper, I mean, it was in German.
Mm-hmm.
And that one from, I don't know if it was Minneapolis, but it was from Minnesota. That was in German too.
Mm-hmm.
During the war there, you know, was a lot in there about the war. And I don't know, he used to, Jake Dennler would come back and then they'd start and discuss that war.
Oh, in World War One.
Yeah.
Do you remember the men talking about the war?
Well,
you would have been 7 or.
I remember that they
thereabouts.
talk about it, but I couldn't tell you much what they said anymore.
No, I suppose some young men from Elgin were in the army. And,
Oh yeah. We had, well, I knew 3 of them, 4 maybe. George Leitmacher, he was in that army.
Mm-hmm.
And Ted Hansen was. And Gatti Kurt was.
Mm-hmm.
They were Swiss people.
Yeah.
Gottfried Klipt. There was one more that I knew from the neighborhood.
Yeah.
You know.
Mm-hmm.
But I can't remember, can't think of the name now. I couldn't tell you. Maybe sometimes it pops up again in my head, but.
Yeah, well, I'm curious about music, maybe because I'm a musician, but were there any, you remember any music? Were there groups of people who would meet and sing together, or
Well,
was there a town band or dance bands, anything like that?
Elgin had an opera house. There was
It had an opera house, yeah, like Volga.
dances and Elgin had.
So there were dances and
There were dances
plays put on
Saturday
maybe?
night.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times it seemed like if a young couple got married, they'd always have a dance. And, and I suppose people bring them gifts. And,
What kind of music was it? Was it like Swiss music or Norwegian music, or were they playing American popular music? Is it like ragtime?
I don't know. I think it was more kind of more American than it was anything Swiss.
Yeah.
They maybe had some Swiss mixed in too. Because
was there anybody you knew who sang, Swiss? When you were growing up, did you learn any Swiss songs? Did you hear your mother or father singing?
My mother used to sing quite a bit while she worked, but I know one of them. I don't know the names of the songs.
Can you remember any of them, or how they go?
Kommt ein Vogel geflogen. There's
a bird came flying. Yeah.
But I don't remember. That was the first line, but I don't remember.
I'll bet we could track that down, probably. I'll bet it's
I don't remember.
in a book somewhere. Yeah.
Those were, no, sometimes she felt good. She'd work and sing.
Yeah. What kind of work did she do? I mean, she'd be working in the house,
in
right?
The farm, of course, you had your housework. And then there were, spring came, early spring, you put eggs under a hen and hatched chickens.
Yeah.
And then you had the little chicks to run
So the
after.
farm wife would take care of the little chicks. And she'd be cooking and helping, working in the garden and take care of laundry.
She'd go up and help milk too. I don't know if she did when I was real little, but maybe not. But as I can remember, when I was a little bigger anyway, she'd go and put the cows in and help milk. I don't.
Did she ever tell you about her life in Switzerland and France? Did she tell you stories about growing up and about the Japy family?
She'd talk about it, They do it so and so in Switzerland or something, but a lot of that I think I don't remember.
Yeah, well, you can't remember everything.
She talked about, she used to always, when we'd be haying especially, and we'd be out there in the hay field, and then that one time, well, I just tag along, I was just a kid, I don't know. I maybe was even 10 or 9, 10, I don't know, maybe 11. But anyway, that one day, she sent me home for some darn thing. I was supposed to go and do something. She forgot, or I don't remember what, but she sent me home. And I was supposed to, well, I probably did what she taught me. But then she had the wash tub outside there near, well, it's a few feet from the pump, but there was a little bit of water in it. And I started to pump water in buckets, and I filled that wash tub. And Ellen Hansen, she had given me, I don't remember, it was 2 or 3 ducks, little ducklings, you know.
Mm-hmm.
She always was hatching chickens and ducks and geese and whatever come along. And of course I put cold water from the pump in that tub, and I picked up them little ducklings and put them in there. Mm-hmm. And you know, that almost killed them. They couldn't stand that cold water. And one of them started to sink. But anyway, she came home. And when she saw that, she got all excited. She went, took them out and brought them in the house and started up this
probably warmed them up.
Kitchen stove.
Yeah.
Put them in the oven. They came through it, but if she wouldn't have come when she did, they'd have been dead.
Well, yeah, I can see how you can remember that. There was a little bit of excitement down on the farm there. You almost had some frozen ducks. Yeah.
Poor little ducklings, yeah. Yeah. Oh, they were a little bigger. They weren't real little anymore, but still, they'd follow you around, you know. You'd feed them and they'd quack, 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 quack.
Yeah. Did you enjoy the animals there on the farm? You had cows and chickens and ducks. And you had a dog. Did you have any cats at all?
Yeah, sure we did. We had probably 4 or 5 of them. No,
your dad had a horse or 2, I think.
3 of them.
3 horses, yeah. What were their names?
Well, one was Bill and one was Nellie. And I got the other one, I can't remember what they called it. It had a name of some kind, but Bill and Nellie, and then once, well, that Nellie, it got so, it was all right, but when it was pulling a wagon or a sled or something, it would get short.
Short of breath, panting.
I suppose it had, maybe it was a heart condition or something, I don't know. But then once, I don't know just when it was, but once when my dad went in the barn, it died. It had a heart attack or something, I don't know what. But I think there was nothing. I know they have the, what do you call them, the doctor for the animals, you know.
The veterinarian.
Veterinarian. And I guess there was nothing they could do about it. But it just...
well, your dad used the horses for plowing, I suppose, and for haying. And when you'd go into town, would he hitch the horses? Did you have a wagon or a sled in the winter?
Wagon or a sled in winter.
Because I remember you're saying your dad never did learn to drive, right? He never had a car or drove a car.
No, he didn't. No.
And he lived until, 1946, I think.
Yeah,
he died
I guess so. Yeah.
46. Yeah. So,
well, when we lived after... We were over in Switzerland 2 years, and then we came back. Then we bought that Habecker house down by the church.
Right by the Apostolic Church.
Yeah. And then there was people going by. A lot of times they'd stop, you know.
Yeah.
And he'd ride up.
So he could get a ride. Yeah.
Ride up with them and back, or there was always somebody from the territory that was up and down.
Yeah. Would you say people helped each other out a lot? You know, I mean, you talk about neighbors stopping to give your dad a ride, and in terms of even when you were back on the farm, would people help with, you know, if somebody broke a leg, or if there was a fire, or if there were crops to bring in, neighbors would join in and kind of look out for each other.
Yeah, they'd go and help thrashing, you know. Your oats, wheat, and barley, and the whole neighborhood. Well, Chris Gregerson, he had the thrashing machine, But I think there was somebody else before that, but I don't remember. But I know he came around, well, he just had kind of a territory.
Oh, so the farmers would pay him
Yeah.
to bring his machine and
And
do
he'd
their
come with
threshing.
that thrashing machine and thrash your oats, wheat or barley, whatever you had. And then in the fall later, then anyway, my dad did, and some of the others did too. They plant clover seed, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the fall later, then you had to think Gregerson would come again with, but that had to be a different machine to get that clover seed out.
So that was a fall crop.
Yeah. So later in the fall.
And they'd harvest that later in the fall.
Yeah.
And then what, they'd feed that to the cattle, the clover?
Yeah, the clover. The cattle ate clover, and the horses did too. And then you had Timothy that you had in the barn, and then you always had a few calves that you had to feed. Or
Did your dad have any fruit trees?
Yeah.
You know, apple trees, or what kind of trees did he?
There were three trees in that place when they bought it. They were big buggers, and they had apples for many years. Well, I don't know. There was one of them. They called it Has. It was a good apple for cooking or baking or eating. Then there was another tree, a big one. They must have been there a long time because they looked older to me, you know, but they were big. And
were they kept pruned? I mean, so your dad pruned them? And
my dad always pruned them, but see, when he moved in there, he planted a bunch of trees then. And he planted blackberries and raspberries. And Mom had strawberries in the garden. And then there was some plum trees. We had one that had nice big blue plums. And some years it was loaded, and then some, you know, if the weather wasn't just right, there wasn't much there. Then we had two rows of grapes, blue ones and some white ones. And they usually turned out okay too. But of course he made wine then. Then there were a lot of wild grapes on the fences around.
Sure.
I don't know today. That's probably still
I'm sure, I remember.
Probably nobody bothers with it. They go and buy everything.
Would he make wine from those wild grapes?
Oh, yeah. And then we had 2 rows of tame grapes, then he put some of that, mixed that together. And I don't know, I didn't drink any, but they always seemed to think it was good.
Did he ever make hard cider? Take apple cider and let it ferment, you know, so you get a mildly alcoholic kind of apple.
I don't remember that we had cider. Maybe he did, but not that I can remember. Hanson's made cider. I know they had an orchard right
maybe a
below
press.
us. Gosh, there must have been 30 trees in there.
Yeah.
I used to climb over the fence and get some. There were some that were real good eating. But then the grass, you know, of course they didn't mow it or anything. But there was a lot of good apples in there. When they pick them, they used to bring up some there. Of course, we had our own too, but there was some of them that really were early apples, and they were good. But I used to climb over the fence and get some.
Off the tree or off the ground?
Oh, you could get them on the ground.
They didn't care,
on the
probably.
tree.
Yeah.
Well, the grass grew, and though they fell down, they usually weren't bruised when they were grass.
Cushioned by the grass.
Yeah.
Did you ever see a barn being built? I mean, did people, you know, if somebody needed a barn, would several families come and, you know, just work steadily?
The whole neighborhood would go, there were barns built when I was growing up there. I suppose I didn't pay much attention to them, but I know they'd have a gang coming in, you know, and work on it, and chicken coops and hog houses, and I don't know what all. Granaries and corn cribs.
Yeah. Well, you wrote something very nice here called Wintertime Did you just write that today?
Yesterday, I think.
Why don't you read it?
Well,
It's a nice
it isn't just
recollection.
exactly right, I don't think. Back in the good old days, winter time, huh? Every Saturday a.m. it was time to get ready and head for the little Swiss town of Elgin. First we had to put straw in the sleigh, then the horse blankets and some heated bricks to keep warm for the 6-mile ride into town. I received 3 nickels so I could buy what I liked best. This was 1 cone of ice cream and 1 package of gum. I usually saved 1 nickel for the next trip. At Max Toma we bought our groceries, and Mr. Toma would also put a sack of candy in the box for me. I did not care for candy, so they were saved in the cupboard until my cousins came or the Hanson girls. We had plenty of hills, so we would go sleigh riding and always enjoy it. In summertime, we would go down to the creek and catch crabs, came home, cleaned them and fried them. Were they ever good? We had a dog named Rink. Wherever I went, he came along. He enjoyed playing in the creek. Now and then he caught a fish. The Hansons had a turkey gobbler. He always seemed to hang around the corn crib, and I certainly didn't like him. And his tail used to fan out, and he'd go, gobble, 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 gobble. And I sometimes had to crawl over the fence where the hogs were, because those gobblers can get pretty mean with you if they take after you.
Yeah. So he was like the watchdog for the Hansons. Well, that's very nice. Yeah, you should keep writing about your memories. Yeah. Well, I think we'll stop for now. Is there anything else you want to say? Because we're going to send this tape to the Elgin Library, and because I think there are people in Elgin who would like to know about what it was like living there back in the early 1900s. Yeah. So I think what you're saying is going to be very helpful to them. Is there anything you'd like to say to people in Elgin who might see this?
Oh, I don't know what to say.
Well, you don't have to say anything. We'll do a little more taping perhaps tomorrow.
Yeah.
Because I'd like to talk about the time from when you were a teenager, 16, and then you went to Switzerland with your parents. And, that's a whole other chapter in your life.
Yeah,
so we can talk about that tomorrow or some other day. So I think for tonight, we'll just say good night to people in Elgin.
Yeah.